You know what's fascinating about human nature? We instinctively want to fight fire with fire, but history shows that the most powerful victories often come from those who refuse to play by evil's rulebook.
That's such an intriguing perspective. What makes you say that?
Well, I've been diving into this concept that challenges everything we think we know about confronting wrongdoing. It's like this ancient wisdom from Romans that says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good," which seems counterintuitive in today's world of instant revenge.
Oh, yes. Like when someone cuts you off in traffic and your first instinct is to speed up and do the same to them?
Exactly. And here's what's fascinating. Studies in conflict resolution show that retaliatory behavior actually escalates conflicts 70% of the time, while de-escalation techniques lead to positive outcomes in nearly 85% of cases.
Those numbers are pretty compelling. But how do you actually put this into practice when emotions are running high?
Let me share a real-world example. A few years ago, I witnessed a situation where a colleague was being systematically undermined by another team member. Subtle criticisms, exclusion from meetings, the works.
Oh no, those workplace dynamics can be absolutely toxic. What happened?
Well, instead of retaliating, they did something remarkable. They started documenting everything transparently, sharing information proactively, and actually going out of their way to include the person who was trying to exclude them.
That must have taken an enormous amount of self control. Did it actually work?
Here's the surprising part. Within 6 months, the entire team dynamic had shifted. The transparency created this ripple effect where others started operating more openly too. It's like what organizational psychologists call the positive deviance effect.
So you're saying that by refusing to play the game, you actually change the rules entirely?
Precisely. And this applies beyond just personal conflicts. Look at historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr. His commitment to nonviolent resistance wasn't passive at all. It was an active strategy that transformed the entire civil rights movement.
That's making me think about how this might apply to current social justice movements and conflicts.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Research from the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict shows that nonviolent resistance movements are actually twice as likely to achieve their goals compared to violent ones.
Those statistics are pretty eye opening. But what about when someone has genuinely wronged you or your loved ones?
That's where this approach becomes most challenging and most powerful. Think about Nelson Mandela. After 27 years in prison, he chose reconciliation over revenge, which completely transformed South Africa's future.
How do you maintain that kind of perspective when everything in you wants to strike back?
Well, neuroscience gives us some fascinating insights here. Studies show that acts of forgiveness actually activate the same pleasure centers in our brain as receiving rewards. It's like we're biologically wired to benefit from choosing good over evil.
That's really interesting. So there's actually a physiological benefit to taking the high road?
Exactly. And here's another surprising finding. Researchers at Stanford found that people who practice responding to negativity with positivity show reduced stress levels and improved cardiovascular health over time.
So it's not just about moral victory, it's actually better for our well being?
Precisely. And what's really powerful is how this approach creates what psychologists call a virtuous cycle. When we respond to negativity with positivity, it actually changes the dynamic of the entire situation.
That reminds me of the concept of emotional contagion, how emotions and behaviors can spread through groups.
Yes, and studies show that positive behaviors are actually more contagious than negative ones. One person choosing to break the cycle of retaliation can influence up to 3 degrees of separation in their social network.
So, in a way, we're not just choosing our own response, we're actually modeling a different way of handling conflict for others.
That's exactly right. And here's what's really exciting. Every time we choose this approach, we're not just affecting our immediate situation. We're creating new possibilities for everyone around us.
That's actually quite hopeful. The idea that our individual choices can have such a ripple effect.
And perhaps that's the ultimate strategy for defeating evil. Not by becoming stronger in its own game, but by choosing to play a different game altogether. One where the goal isn't to win over others, but to transform the entire playing field.
That's really given me a lot to think about. It's like we have this power we don't often recognize.
Indeed, and maybe that's the most important takeaway, that in every moment of conflict or hurt, we have this incredible opportunity, not just to avoid becoming what we despise, but to actually create something beautiful in its place.